Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, reform is flirting with traditional Labour support, workers and union members. After Nigel Farage's almost unbelievable success in elections last week, is this the strategy to take them to Downing Street?
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malika Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.
Nigel Farage is coming for your votes. Actually, to be honest, last week's election results suggest he's got plenty of them already. 10 local authorities are now controlled by reform, including Doncaster, taken from Labour. 3 mayoralties also went their way, plus the common seat of Runcorn and Helsby, again snatched from Labour's hands. Their newest recruit taking her place today.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors.
There is now no part of the UK where reform feared to tread, and they're now being more explicit in trying to woo some of the more traditional Labour voters, union members and workers more generally. And you can imagine how that's going down in Downing Street and union branches the length of the land. Our political correspondent Liz Bate and political reporter Alex Rogers are back on the podcast. Nigel Farage, courting the unions of all things. Alex, you're going to have to explain.
Yeah, so this is a little bit curious, but it started happening maybe a few months ago when the bin strike erupted in Birmingham, and then it sort of ramped up a notch when he was seen calling for the nationalisation of steel. I think some people started thinking, hang on a second, you don't necessarily associate Farage's politics with the trade union movement, but he clearly believes that he has some common truck with not necessarily union leaders, but their members who are workers and voters.
We might not associate, Liz, his politics with the workers necessarily, but he has been hand in hand with some pretty prominent union figures in the past, particularly when it came to the matter of Brexit.
It has, and I think that's where he probably came together in some ways with that cohort of voters on the Brexit issue. They have other areas of similarity as well. We've heard Reform speaking recently about the fact that they want to renationalise British Steel. Look, the problem that we always make here in Westminster is that we decide who we think Nigel Farage is going to appeal to, and it's always kind of the Tory vote. Old-fashioned Tories, we think, is his area of appeal. And what we see time and time again is he takes all kinds of different voters from all areas, not just of England, but of the rest of the UK. He's doing well now in Scotland. He's doing well in Wales. He's many, many times when we weren't expecting it, eaten in to the Labour vote. And I think that is just another example of this.
This is a party that is not scared to go to the supposed red wall and campaign. So going after the workers, I suppose it's a no-brainer.
Even during the campaigning of the locals, Farage wasn't actually talking about the Tories that much. For him, they are toast, they're irrelevant. It's about Labour. And we can see that in the results, taking Doncaster, which was the only council that Labour actually controlled in this set of election. It went to Farage, in what you would consider a heartland. So for Reform and Farage, this isn't about the Tories anymore. It's about Labour.
Liz, you were there. You were on the ground. How did that happen?
Well, that was really interesting because one of the first result that came in was the mayoral, and Labour hung on actually in the Doncaster mayoral, and Ros Jones was re-elected. But because we were at the count, we kind of see what happens below the surface. There is a ex-Conservative MP there, Nick Fletcher, who now continues to have a very good personal following in Doncaster. He's got a great social media presence. He's been very savvy in holding on to his support there. He came a very close third, so he split that Labour opposition vote, which is why they snuck in.
Desperately concerning for Labour.
Oh, very concerning for Labour, no question. The next day, the council results started coming in. Reform didn't just do well in those council elections, they absolutely wiped out Labour. That is Labour heartland. It was just Labour councillors, I should say, a little smattering of independents and Tories. Reform came in and wiped it out. I mean, it was actually an incredible result from nothing.
Difficult to gauge, but I wonder what percentage of their success is down to the policy and what percentage down to the personality. I mean, Nigel Farage, the political leader, that's a big part of this.
It's two things. It's the one policy on immigration. And whatever you think of him, it is the incredible talent, commitment, charisma, appeal, wide appeal of Nigel Farage. He's one of the most successful and impressive in what he's achieved politicians of our generation. I would liken him to people like Tony Blair in terms of his ability to communicate and win support. He's always been an outsider here in Westminster, and yet he pushes and pushes and pushes. I was looking back at his record. The first time he was elected was in 1999. That was his first election. And he's carried on ever since. And he's been in the wilderness. He's been considered a joke. He's failed many times. He's often been humiliated. He's been through scandal after scandal after scandal. He is an absolute example of if you just carry on, eventually you'll get there.
Isn't it also possible that, yes, whilst Reform have been a great campaigning force, Labour have left the door open for them on this?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot with the locals. There's disaffection with Labour. Winter fuel has come up time and time again as a policy that voters hate. They think it's cruel. They don't understand why it's being done. Other things like welfare cuts, that has really upset a lot of Labour's base. So there's now this big debate going on in Labour of how do you deal with Nigel Farage? Do we stick to what we're good at, which is, being progressive, left-wing policies? They'd point to things like the Employment Rights Bill. Or do we take on Farage by directly trying to compete with him? That is the conversation that's going on in Labour right now.
Migration. I mean, hasn't Labour left the door open by essentially normalising the way in which Reform talks about mass migration?
That is the big door. In some ways, that's the door that can't be closed. That was left open decades ago. That was where Reform really made their inroads. And so trying to row back on that now, I think, is too difficult. The reason that Reform have done so well on that and Nigel Farage has done so well on that is that Labour absolutely abdicated, just left that area of discussion. They were not for decades prepared to talk about immigration. They're scared of it, and they have been for a long time, and it was a huge mistake. The savviness of Nigel Farage is in the fact that he says things that other people are too afraid to say. So things like there are areas of the country where communities are divided. Communities are divided and eroded, and they are separate. And there are places where people scoff at this all the time in Westminster, but he says it. There are places where people don't speak English. And that really kind of diminishes people's way of life when they don't have a shared language. In poor areas of the country where, people look around them and they see their community changing, or they look down the road to an asylum hotel and they see, hundreds of young lads from Africa, from Iraq, from Afghanistan being dumped on the doorstep. They have no jobs. They're drifting in and out of the, that's a terrible position. I think that Labour have left the country, and they haven't been prepared to say it. And Nigel Farage has been prepared to say it. And the people in those communities, they don't consider themselves racist, but they think, well, he's the only person that is prepared to say, look at what's happened to our area.
What Liz was saying about immigration not being popular in lots of areas of the country. But if you look at London is somewhere where you would say immigration does work, but that's because London is a massive city. It caters to everyone. You can find your scene, what you want in London, whereas in smaller towns and cities, that's not the case. And people see, their town changing, their identity changing. And that's what this backlash is about, I think.
One of the interesting things about Reform as a movement, I think, is that, and Scotland is a good example of this, in Wales and other areas of the country as well, they have, in so many areas of the UK, literally no infrastructure on the ground. We think of politics as, grassroots, knocking on doors, having councillors, understanding the area and the electorate, and that is how political parties are successful. Reform is totally different. It has this one leader, very charismatic, very good at social media, very good at getting his message across, very good at speaking in the way that normal people speak. And then you suddenly see Reform support. There is Reform support in areas of the country that have no reform candidates, and suddenly it's kind of coming up, and I think that is I think that shows the kind of level of dissatisfaction and how kind of old-fashioned and out of touch the kind of main political parties are seeming to people, that they're willing to turn to a party that doesn't even have any presence in their area.
Is it believable to say that Nigel Farage is a friend of the working man?
The union leaders definitely don't think so. They think this is all a cynical ploy, really, and that he's a complete opportunist. And you're starting to see them ramp up attacks against him. You know, Paul Nowak of the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, he's saying that Farage is a political fraud. He's cosplaying as the champion of the working people. And I guess what they would say is, you know, when he had an opportunity to vote for better rights at work, he chose not to. They're talking about the Employment Rights Bill, which sort of, you know, effectively bans 0 hours contracts, you know, that sort of thing. And he voted against it. They say this bill is prohibitive on employers. So that's not good for workers because they're not going to hire people. That's the kind of reform argument. And they also draw a distinction between union leaders and union members. Union leaders, they regard in a similar way to the way that they see the leadership of the Labour Party, out of touch, you know, disconnected from the concerns of ordinary workers. So they make a distinction between union bosses and union members, definitely.
I mean, Nigel Farage has admitted that he would wish to see an insurance-based system of healthcare in this country. That, to me, does not strike it as a traditionally working-class friendly policy.
No, and on lots of issues, they are quite, especially economically, right-wing. I think if there were people in the unions and workers who voted for reform and Nigel Farage thinking he was going to toughen up workers' rights in a kind of traditional Labour sense, I think they would be very disappointed. I also think this issue on the NHS could be something that gets in their way as we kind of approach a general election, because the NHS in this country is a bit like a, you know, more of a religion than a political issue, and the reforms that they want to make to it are quite right wing and huge reforms. It would, you know, fundamentally change the nature of the NHS in this country, so that could be a big problem for them. But, you know, this is the politics of, you know, as I said before, one man, a kind of charm that appeals to people. And I think that there are lots of cohorts of voters that might, you know, kind of go towards Nigel Farage. But if they also may feel that they were sold a bit of a dream, a bit like Brexit, right? Sold the dream, voted for it, and then you get to the other side of it and think, well, this doesn't really feel as good as I was promised that it would, because it is about feelings, to be honest, more than sort of policy detail.
But when it comes to policy, though, Alex, I mean, when it comes to something like net zero, I mean, isn't Nigel Farage absolutely in lockstep with large sections of the unions?
Maybe, sort of, yeah. I think the unions, they like net zero as a kind of end goal. What they struggle with is the route to get there. They say that, you know, we're not ready to transition completely to clean power. We still need oil and gas in the North Sea. And, you know, at the moment it is costing jobs. So I think on there you can see like maybe there is a bit of commonality between Farage and some of the union leaders, but you know they don't think that, they don't want him to be saying the message really. They want Labour to listen to what they're saying. I think with the locals we'll see some of the unions start to put more pressure on Labour to listen to them so that Farage doesn't have that platform.
The thing I find fascinating, the prospect I find fascinating, is that in a few months, maybe a couple of years, we could see a situation in which there is some form of industrial action, perhaps broad, perhaps narrow, in which Labour will be taking on the unions and Nigel Farage will be on the picket line waving his placard.
I mean, British politics is constantly throwing up surprises for us, and I can see the delight on your face, Neil, when you kind of think of that image, and that is quite an extraordinary thing to think about, but also quite likely, I think. Look, for a long time, Labour's relationship with the unions has been difficult because it's much easier when you're in opposition. It's much easier when you have someone like Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the party to be, to have a really great, close relationship with the unions where they really feel like the Labour Party stands up for them. Keir Starmer always had his eye on number 10. There was that he put some distance between himself and the unions because he knew that was politically, the best thing for him to do if he wanted to get into power. And so their relationship is tricky. And Nigel Farage, as we know, is good at exploiting anything like that.
Certainly is. I mean, Alex, so what are the unions doing? What is Labour going to do about this?
From the union perspective, it's all about highlighting Farage's voting record. So they're stepping up attacks on him on social media. You'll see all their members and workers sort of addressing the camera and saying, Farage is threatening my job because he hates electric vehicles so much, for example. I think within Labour, there's been a little bit of a reluctance to acknowledge what he's doing with union members. They think it's all just talk. Again, they think, well, look at his record, look at what he actually stands for. It doesn't mean anything. But I think the locals should be a bit of a wake up here that he has an ability to reach people who are feeling disaffected with Labour and the government, even if they traditionally have always voted Labour.
I mean, a wake up, yeah, but surely not just alarm bells are ringing in Downing Street at the moment. It's panic stations. It has to be panic stations. If Reform are coming after Labour's traditional core vote, they must be at high dudgeon at the moment.
Yeah, but I think, to be honest, the problem with the Labour Party is, first of all, they're not panicking enough, and they have so many things to panic about. So they're kind of, fighting on all fronts. There's, they have to first. They're trying to look at what's going on in the US. There's global politics to deal with. There's, the kind of aftermath of the local elections and all of that. So I think this will be low down the agenda. It kind of encapsulates how they've always approached Nigel Farage in whatever form he came, UKIP before this and, Brexit and all of that, which is they don't really believe it. They just never really believe that he's going to take their voters away from him. And that's basically, they always underestimate Nigel Farage. And I think this is another instance where they probably will. The converse of this is this could actually work quite well for Labour because, as I said, their relationship with the unions has been a little bit tricky. The union leaders might start to look at this kind of infiltration by Nigel Farage and think, hang on, better the devil you know. Maybe the Labour Party aren't so bad after all. Maybe we'll be a bit nicer to them in public and kind of reaffirm our relationship with them, because that's a lot better than giving up all our members to Reform.
Just a final thought. You look at the detail of the local elections. It seems pretty clear that Reform were taking votes, middle-class Conservative votes. They were also taking working-class Labour votes. How do you come up with a policy proposal that satisfies both those groups at the same time? Because I can't see it. And
I think that's why he's doing so well at the moment. He doesn't have to have concrete policies. He is an idea. He is a vision. He is something that voters are projecting their own insecurities and fears onto him, and he personifies that at the moment. But he's not been near government, really, has he? And this is his first taste of it. Reform now have 10 councils. Well, Labour are thinking, OK, let's see if you can walk the walk as well as talking the talk.
He is currently in a situation with the electorate where they've basically been on a couple of dates, right? And when you've been on a couple of dates with somebody, you can project your own internal thoughts, hopes, dreams onto someone and think they're perfect for me. They're everything I want. I've been there and done that as well. You get to the other side of it and you find out that it's all a bit more of a grey area than that. It's all a bit tricky. But he's untested as a politician, so he can promise people things, and he doesn't yet have to deliver. And that's where we're at with him.
Alex, Liz, thanks very much. That is your lot for today. For more on this story, though, you can read Alex's analysis. Just head to skynews.com. And don't forget to give the podcast a follow. It should be dead easy wherever you found this one. We'll see you tomorrow.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malika Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.